I woke up feeling a bit queasy in the stomach. His hand was on my back while the other was trying to get into my private area. I had a bad headache that wasn't related to the drink I'd had the night before. "Honey, I'm not a morning person," I muttered to CJ. "Oh, sorry," he whined, "but what about all those stories about you and Mark going at it all night and half the next day?" I was 20 at the time, and I was deeply in love. "You can thrive on lovemaking." He sounded sad as he told me this, and I found myself questioning my choices again. On paper, everything seemed perfect. I traded a 40-year-old man who worked all day and tinkered with his car for a 30-year-old. A 30-year-old man who worked all day and fixed his car. Mark was a great guy. He loved me and was focused on our future. CJ was totally devoted to me. Mark wasn't controlling or violent, but he would fight with me if I stood firm. He'd just smirk and walk away. That wasn't how things were supposed to be. My dad always did what my mom wanted. He understood the saying, "Happy wife, happy life." Mr. Mark Clayton would give me a look that seemed to say, "You're crazy if you deny him closeness." He'd just shrug and tinker. I also noticed he spent a lot of time working on his car. I really disliked that Mustang, and the strangest thing was that when I stopped having sex with him, he started talking non-stop. My mom said that would happen, but a couple of days later he started checking his watch. I saw a calendar in the kitchen with next weekend marked in red, and several days leading up to it were marked too. I didn't understand why until I found a brochure for a hike and the brothel in Las Vegas. The cover featured photos of women who seemed eager to please my husband for free and would gladly charge me for the same. They were all young and attractive. I was nearly in shock. What irked me most was that he had already crossed out that day and it wasn't even noon yet. I wasn't foolish, and there's no chance I'll allow him to go off and engage in carnal encounters with a group of professional women. I anticipated the outcome of this scenario. He would have attempted it. To dismiss me even more quickly than his Mustang could reach 60 miles per hour in under 5 seconds. That evening, I realized where my main support lay, so I got him ready for sex. I was really angry, and ultimately I ended up feeling hurt. "No," he responded. His words came out quickly, almost as an afterthought. It seemed inconsequential and unworthy of acknowledgement. My frustration reached boiling point as the situation reversed. "Come on, Mark, it's been a whole week already," I pleaded. I'm just not feeling it," he replied. "I could attend to your needs." I tried to appear alluring with a smile, although it felt like a struggle, especially when my deepest desire was to rid myself of him entirely. "Please, darling, let me please you," I begged. "I'm not sure," he mused, as if contemplating. "Maybe in a week." I was stunned as this was a recurring pattern between us. I'd tried employing all the tactics gleaned from TV, magazines, and my mother to gain the upper hand. Mark always seemed to get his way, while CJ adored me and held me in high regard. I had a divine status in his eyes. All I had to do was ask and he would comply. Why hadn't I left Mark for CJ yet? There were 2 reasons. Firstly, deep down I loved Mark despite his poor work ethic, lack of responsibility, and dislike of confrontation. Secondly, the more practical reason was CJ's lack of financial stability despite his income and willingness to cater to my desires. Mark, the foolish man I married, earned a 6-figure salary. Maybe it was my salary that caused the breakdown in our relationship. We weren't always like this. We were deeply in love at first, but after 20 years and countless arguments, we'd both built up defenses against each other. I was thinking about how our love had turned into a constant yearning and then into intense animosity. CJ came to mind. He was trying to boost my mood by gently caressing my legs. I was annoyed when Mark tried the same thing. CJ's efforts only made me more irritated. I asked him to come closer and massage my chest. He responded with enthusiasm. I nodded and he promptly moved towards me. I hesitated to inform him that his leg rubbing was bothering me and distracting my thoughts. Conversely, my large chest were as artificial as my blonde hair. I had surgery and lost most sensation in my breast buds. Mark was always great at pleasuring me there, unlike anyone else. Another thing I didn't like about him was that he was really good in bed and his manhood was much larger than CJ's. Mark always left me trembling like jelly. It was hard to believe he never cheated, and even harder to believe he truly loved and still loves me. This will be tough for him, but it's good for him because it means I can go back to Mark if I need to. To be honest, I wouldn't think about leaving Mark if he didn't always have to win every argument. If he'd just let me take control as I wanted, we'd have been a lot happier. In fact, if I'd been in charge, I'd have been a happier wife and made him the happiest man on the planet. But he annoyed me too often. It was CJ who helped me understand my true power in relationships. He told me CJ said that in divorces, women usually have the advantage, while husbands often end up living with their mothers and eating canned tuna. CJ himself was living with a woman who wanted to marry him, but she wasn't exactly his ideal partner since they weren't married. He said that breaking up with her wouldn't be a problem. I acknowledged his point, and he seemed surprised. That day, he suggested I should call him. CJ whispered while gently caressing my chest. I suddenly realized what we'd been planning for weeks. We'd been waiting for the perfect moment, and this week it finally arrived. It was the ideal time because Mark was away, and neither CJ nor I wanted to confront my husband directly about my decision to leave him and file for a divorce. The mere thought of it made me feel uneasy. I have a strong moral compass, and the idea of contacting him while he was at work seemed wrong. It felt wrong to contact him while he was working so hard on business to fund our lifestyle. Mark deserved better. We needed to have a heartfelt conversation about our relationship. If we could conclude that our marriage was beyond repair, only then should we consider divorce. Following the divorce, we'd both be free to pursue new relationships. It wasn't the noblest approach, but it was the path we chose throughout our more than 20 years of marriage. Mark never laid a hand on me or raised his voice when disagreements arose. He was always willing to compromise. Over time, I grew familiar with his thought process and understood precisely what that look meant. He never raised his voice or touched me when we disagreed. He was always trying to find a way to compromise. Sometimes I thought he was too willing to settle. If we couldn't agree, he'd flash a quirky grin and walk away. Over time, I got to know his thought process. I understood what that look meant. It was a silent declaration of "screw you. You'll get nothing if you won't agree to split things 50-50ths. Who'd want to be close to a 40-year-old? As time went on, I became more and more resentful. I reached a point where I wanted everything in the divorce. I wanted the house, my possessions, and most of his finances. When he retired, I expected half of his pension, too. I spoke to a lawyer, had divorce papers drawn up, and confided in my mother and numerous friends. They all said it would be successful, but they advised against it. What really bothered me was that even my mother, who always disliked Mark, thought I was irrational for considering divorce. But their opposition made me more determined. My lawyer, who was only interested in making money, suggested citing mental injury and neglect as grounds for divorce. It was a deceitful trick, but it promised the freedom and control over my life that I craved. I resented his obliviousness, but life is harsh. He's resilient and will bounce back with time. If I'd discussed things with him, he might have tried to compromise or talked me out of it. Sometimes drastic measures are necessary to capture someone's attention. It felt like one of those "do unto others before they do unto you" moments. I took a deep breath and answered the phone. CJ intensified his focus on me. I was on the phone to a friend who'd fallen unconscious. I could hear the rumble of trucks from behind the house, probably a neighbor's furniture delivery. I dialed a number I'd grown all too familiar with over the years. It rang once and connected. Midway through the second ring, it seemed almost too coincidental, as if he anticipated my call. I asked Mark, my voice cautious, who else would answer. He replied, his casual response softening my self-consciousness. He asked, "Why are you calling me?" He sounded a bit surprised. On reflection, I realized he was right. I hadn't called him in years, except when I needed something for myself. This man had worked hard to provide for us, while I had largely ignored him. Perhaps I could let him keep a little more money. I didn't need to hurt him, I just needed to be free. I reminded him, I'm your wife. I was on the brink of liberation, feeling the intensity build as I neared the finish line. I could feel sweat dripping onto Shannon beneath me. She responded with a high-pitched sound. Pulling me closer and sealing our lips in a passionate kiss. Her grip tightened around me as I tried to regain my composure. Shannon giggled and kissed me again. The temptation was strong. Shannon, darling, I can't resist. I managed to choke out, you'll have to wait a little longer, sweetheart. It'll be much better if you do. Every word from he was pushing me to the limit. Oh my God, drive me wild, baby. I was struggling to maintain control. Shannon had this incredible ability to push me to the edge, leaving me always wanting more. It was hard to believe it had only been 3 months since I met her. Just as I felt like I was about to lose myself, my phone rang. The phone rang, breaking the spell. I glanced down to see Shannon clearly enjoying herself. Her eyes were rolled back, and her legs were trembling. Oh, baby, that feels amazing, she murmured. I tried to refocus. What are you doing to me? I asked, annoyed at the interruption. I'm trying to make you happy, she said, slightly. I couldn't help but. I've been happy since I met you, she said, grinning. You'll be even happier when we're finished. I reached for the phone, hoping it might be important. It was the movers. I'd completely forgotten they were supposed to call when we arrived. Shannon, undeterred, resumed her playful actions. Just as I was getting back into the moment, my phone rang again. I recognized the number and nodded to Shannon, who looked at me with a mix of amusement and a mischievous grin. After the call, Shannon rolled over and nestled beside me. I couldn't help but admire her physique, her toned legs and her heart-shaped derriere. Her derriere was perfectly shaped and her waist was slender, making her look like a work of art. I laughed at her just about God, focusing more on her posterior than her chest. I was in love again. This was the second time I'd fallen for her, but this time everything felt right. This love was akin to a phoenix rising from the ashes of my past. Perhaps I should begin from the start. 3 months ago, I was foolishly in love with a woman who despised me. I was in a relationship with a woman who despised me, and we both knew it. I loved her, but I was naive and thought she loved me back. My marriage had its issues, but I thought it was just a phase. My awakening came when my secretary announced a visitor. Shannon entered my office and took a seat. Confusion clouded my mind. Which company are you representing? I asked. I'm part of the. You and me, we're out to get revenge on the idiots at the company, she said. I'm lost. I told her you're about to be Mark and it won't be gentle. She warned me with a shrug of her petite shoulders. She went on, your wife is cheating on you. I thought I'd misheard, but she was so sure, there was no doubt. She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I could tell she was right deep down. It was a realization. I was blown away. I was sweating, my heart was racing and I was on the verge of tears. I was flooded with images of and with an unidentified man, lost in ecstasy. Then, the floodgates opened and tears streamed down my face. I was ashamed of my vulnerability, so I buried my head, refusing to let this petite redhead witness my anguish. Suddenly, I was enveloped in the scent of cherries. Warm hands lifted my head, offering solace and tenderness. I'm really sorry, she said gently. I never saw this coming. I thought you'd be angry and want to confront my boyfriend, perched on my desk. She cradled my head in her lap, stroking it to calm me down. You love her, don't you? She shook her head, even though she cheats on you and never speaks well of you. Do you truly love her when they're together? All she does is. I don't understand you. You try so hard to support her, but she doesn't appreciate you or your efforts. Why do you care so much about her? She continued to stroke my head, her voice calm. I wondered if she was trying to pacify me or if she was simply thinking aloud. Is it because of her blonde hair and ample chest? She questioned. CJ has a thing for blondes with big chests too. I expected more from you, suddenly. I met her gaze. I don't know why I'm so angry with her. I loved her before she dyed her hair. I replied, and I'm the one who paid for those clothes. Her response was a burst of laughter so melodious it caught me off guard. What's amusing? I inquired. I'm just speaking the truth. I know, dear. She replied, but my ex has no clue that his dream woman is mostly artificial. It likely cost you a fortune to make her look that way. I shook my head, feeling as though I were in a haze, yet my anger persisted. Shannon revealed everything, how they met and Anne's ulterior motives. They strategized, believing they'd found the best way to remove me from Anne's life while securing most of my assets. Shannon found herself in a similar, albeit less lawful situation. She'd supported CJ from the start, even as he indulged in affairs with women at the bar where he worked. Meanwhile, he was still looking for his ideal blonde with ample curves, whom he found in a beyond the physical enhancements I financed. It seemed like Anne was also fulfilling a maternal role for him. Shannon hired a private investigator to gather intel on CJ. I spoke with her agent, Sarah Price, multiple times before agreeing to her terms. It wasn't particularly challenging, but this information proved useful for Shannon. Sarah, another striking redhead, reiterated this. I spoke to Shannon a lot because, even though CJ and Shannon weren't married, the information didn't mean much to her. CJ could easily leave Shannon without any consequences. On the other hand, I could use Sarah's findings and recordings to back up my argument in the divorce proceedings and potentially get a smaller financial settlement. Over the weeks of observation and planning, Shannon and I got closer. It all came to a head in a conversation one evening. You deserve better than him, I said. Why don't you just leave? She suggested. Forget about him, but I can't leave without repercussions. I don't let anyone walk all over me, I explained. But haven't you already gained the upper hand by uncovering his schemes? You're not emotionally tied to him like I was, so you're not trapped, I reasoned. You're young and stunning. There's still time for you to find someone who will treat you right, even in the dim interior. My Mustang's green eyes sparkled. So you finally noticed her, huh? She teased. Noticed what I inquired? She grinned. I noticed you from the moment you walked into my office. I confessed, rubbish. She chuckled. You were so infatuated with her that you didn't even register that I was a woman, let alone possibly interested in you. Her laughter always enchanted me. It was one of the things I adored most about her. Why do you think I'm still here? She choked up. I ended things with CJ and any desire for retribution weeks ago. Helping you get even means much more to me than seeking revenge on that fool. I just can't stand the idea of you being financially burdened by those two con artists for the rest of their lives. There has to be a way for us to break free from this. She drew close to me, embraced me, and kissed me for the first time. I was taken aback, yet I relished it too much to entertain the notion of not kissing. After 20 years of marriage, I thought I knew how to kiss. But kissing Shannon was a whole new experience. It tasted different, felt different. I couldn't get enough. We lost track of time, forgetting about the tape recording of our cheating partners. Eventually, a voice interrupted us, but Shannon refused to let go of my hand. I suspected as much. I was hoping this would happen. Sarah remarked, you two are great together. You're much better suited for each other than your current partners. Now that you're a couple, we can let those schemers go. They'll get their comeuppance eventually, but what about the divorce and our retaliation? Shannon asked. Sarah surprised us by explaining some legal matters. She said, are you both committed enough to pursue this? Take some time to consider, this is a significant decision. I'll send the details. You the bill. The following weeks were spent putting our story together. Shannon and I practiced our acting skills. We both told our partners about our supposed hectic work schedules. They believed us. Neither of them had any idea that Shannon and I were acquainted, let alone involved romantically. This gave us the chance to spend more time together, building our mutual attraction until it blossomed into full-blown love. One day, I called Shannon at work and told her I was ready to take our relationship to the next level. I said I felt like I needed to be with her more and that we were practically inseparable every night. She giggled and said that wasn't enough. I told her I was ready to take it further, but we hadn't even had sex yet. She whispered that she was cautious of being overheard at work. I told her I was sure that having sex with her would be incredible. I told her, "You have no idea." She purred but said she didn't have the same assets as my wife. I asked, "What does that matter?" She replied, "What truly makes lovemaking amazing is being with someone you love and genuinely want to please." Then she said it, tears welling up in her eyes and her voice quivering. It was as if she'd been waiting for me to reciprocate. "I love you too, Mark, and I promise it'll always be this way. You can have every part of me whenever you want. I'm yours." She poured out her feelings. I was taken aback. No one, not even Anne in our youth, had ever expressed their love for me so eloquently and passionately. And no, I'd never said anything like that to anyone before. Not even that idiot CJ, she declared solemnly. I never doubted it. I responded, "I'm just curious about how soon we can proceed." Following Sarah's plan, the call this morning was exactly what we were waiting for. The ironic thing was that I genuinely believed that fate brought us together while we were meticulously planning, and we took great care not to be seen together for weeks. Yet acquaintances of ours kept approaching. We were all wondering if our partners were cheating on us. We had to act like we didn't know anything, which was pretty funny. It seemed like only CJ and thought we knew. I was on a Fox business trip, so I didn't know what was going on. It was a ruse, but it did the trick. Luckily, Shannon's mother fell ill around the same time, which made it easier for the swindlers to pull off their scam. Things didn't go as smoothly as we thought they would, though. Shannon and I had both expected the call to go differently. I scheduled the truck to arrive on Sunday morning because I wanted to give the lovebirds a couple of days to relish each other's company before everything unraveled. Nevertheless, Shannon and I relished the moment of triumph as I answered the call and addressed the voice of the woman he. I replied, "Who else can answer my phone?" Shannon approached and embraced me, lending me a strength I never knew I possessed. "Why on earth are you calling me?" I demanded. "I am your wife," she replied. "Mark, dear, I need to tell you something, and you probably won't like it. I think the best way to do this is to tell you that in the long run it will benefit both of us." It may not seem like it now, but I just burst out laughing and he laughed too. I couldn't believe he was laughing at me. CJ went downstairs to see what was happening with the trucks. I wish CJ had been by my side so that I could have got some help. "Why are you laughing?" I asked. "I'm being serious. The other day someone was talking to me and said you'll leave me in the lurch," he said, still in that same chuckling tone. He really knew how to get under my skin. Well, in a moment he'll be laughing out of the other side of his mouth, and that's what it's about. By this point, I was determined to outsmart him. "Let me tell you," he continued, "that I have some news for you. You'll soon find out what it is, and then you'll have to dine alone." "What on earth are you talking about?" I questioned. "I don't think it was your idea at all." He chuckled. "I think this is CJ's scheme." Hell, he knew about me and CJ. He said he'd heard some people talking about it, probably my nosy neighbors. I had to try to salvage the situation. I had to follow through with it. "Mark, I'm leaving you." I said I want a divorce. I put as much conviction into my voice as I could muster, but all he just laughed even harder. "Your letter gave me pause and made me wonder why, but I think you felt you had to set things right." He chuckled. His words sent a shiver down my spine. Nobody knew about that blasted letter, even CJ. She had no clue that I had penned a letter to Mark. The letter was I was supposed to send the divorce papers with a letter to Mark. The letter was about my feelings about our marriage and where we went wrong. It also outlined what Mark needed to do to win me back from CJ. "Mark, we need to talk about this. Let's do it when you get home. Just remember this, my girl. When you look at the sky, you can see the stars, but you can't see the light. Mark, you can see the stars and still not see the light. I called to inform him we were finished and he was singing. Honey, it's really painful, he replied. I heard a woman's voice in the background saying something about being the only woman. He should definitely call Sweet Mark. It's never too late, I said. Why is it too late, Mark? Who is that woman next to you? I've already left, he replied. I feel stronger. I sang this victory song. Oh. Oh my God. Oh. Oh. What do you mean you've already left? I yelled into the phone, suddenly. The dread I'd been feeling all morning intensified. It was like how the coyote feels just before the boulder he's dropped on the roadrunner starts looming over his own head. I strained to hear Mark's response, but all I heard was beeping. I was waiting to hear Mark's response, but all I heard was beeping. I flung the phone onto the bed beside me just as CJ burst into the room. He looked really scared. He told me I needed to get dressed and go downstairs. I quickly threw on a robe and tied it tightly in the living room. I stood in front of a large black. I was met with a woman who owned the place, holding a tablet. I demanded, "Who the hell are you?" She regarded me with a measured gaze, then turned her back. I'm feeling generous, she declared. I understand your situation may evoke anger and resentment, but I won't tolerate rudeness or any delays. You have until the end of the day to leave this house. I'm not moving. You have a few minutes to gather your personal belongings. I'm not budging. This house belongs to me and my husband. It's nearly paid off. CJ called the police. Yes, he did. CJ called the police, which will speed things up. This house, it's not nearly paid off, it's fully paid. This is likely to be the most humiliating moment of your life, ma'am. I stared at her as CJ dialed emergency. A few moments passed, which felt like an eternity, giving me a chance to ponder. Then Mark's words echoed in my mind. What was that supposed victory song? What victory was he declaring? Hank K., the police chief and a personal friend of Mark and me, arrived. The woman strode past me, handing Hank a stack of papers. He perused them, nodding several times before approaching me. He glanced past me to CJ. Is this him? He inquired. Yes, I replied. Don't be vexed, he said. I'm just curious. If this is the man you cheated on Mark with, it's pretty bold to have him here in Mark's house. I forgot Mark sold the house before I could process his words. My mind went into overdrive. A rather cheerful woman pushed through the moving crew and asked, Is he? She sauntered around CJ and then flashed a smile at. I was told you were naive, but I had to see for myself. What on earth are you talking about? I demanded. Half the women in town are wondering why you swapped your husband for a guy with less manhood in his pants and no income. She grinned. Tina, the police chief interrupted, walking over to CJ and asking, Hey, buddy, do you know what a woman says to a guy with a really big male organ? CJ replied, looking bewildered, How would I know? The chief and the plump woman erupted into laughter. Can we? The black woman asked, wiping tears of mirth. Sure, the chief consented, pack your things and leave. Mark sold the house, but he can't. He protested, This is my home. I chose it, even though he paid for it. The chief intervened, he purchased it with his own funds. His name is the sole one on the deed. He can do as he pleases. He pleases? Nonsense. A woman always gets the house in a divorce. I said. Not always, the chief replied. Moreover, you two aren't divorcing. Indeed, that's correct. I intend to file tomorrow. You should have done it last week, as that's when he sold the house. I asked, and the chief replied, It's a bit sneaky, much like sleeping with some pervert while your husband is toiling away at work to buy you all those luxuries, but it's entirely lawful. Darn, I muttered. CJ, contact my lawyer. I need to reach out to the bank and our investment firm. The black woman was in charge and she was waving her hand as her team started to take the furniture out of the house. Where are they taking my furniture? I asked. Your husband donated it to a local charity auction house, she said. You can always buy it back, she added. I picked every piece of this furniture, arranged it, and paid for it. Maybe you should have chipped in, Tina chuckled. Oh, I forgot. What does hair bleach mess with your brain? I brushed off her remark and called the bank. Carly, it's Ann Clayton. Mark's wife. Carly, my lawyer will contact you soon to freeze our accounts, so I need to withdraw the money beforehand. Carly's voice was overly cheerful on the line. Carly, first things first, I'll let Ton handle this. I'll need enough funds to maintain the house and cover expenses for a while. Also, during the freeze, will the current account funds just be locked, or can Mark reroute his direct deposit just to the current account funds? I think he switched his direct deposit last week when he left his job. What did he do? I gasped. Oh, crap. Carly, I want to empty all our accounts and transfer them to a new one. Are you certain about withdrawing everything? She inquired. Absolutely. I affirmed. Mark will land another job quicker. Tina, I'm going to go get a bucket of chicken wings. But this money is all I have until the divorce is finalized. I'll need to issue you a check for that amount, then you'll need to deposit it into your new account. She explained. Fine, I snapped. Just get it done. Consider it done. She replied, once you arrive, I'll hand you a check. For $311, you can proceed. What in the world are you talking about, Carly? I asked, exasperated. There's nearly $500,000 in that account. There was a moment of silence as she considered her words. I know exactly how much was there. I saw that's precisely what happened last week. Chief, this has to be against the law. I protested. It's not illegal, he replied. He clarified that it was pretty rotten, but it was true. The bank enforces a minimum balance policy. If your balance drops below $50, you'll incur a $10 fee. You don't have enough remaining to cover even the fee. CJ handed Ed the phone, and I began conversing with my attorney, my words interspersed with sobs. I recounted how Mark sold the house, drained our bank accounts, and liquidated all our investments. Logging into our investment account, I discovered Mark had cashed out everything, leaving just one share in the cheese company. That's pretty clever, my lawyer said. He got ahead of you there. It's all perfectly legal until the divorce is initiated. He can do whatever he wants with his assets. So he took everything he's likely going to cash out and stash it in offshore accounts beyond our reach. He's aiming to boost his wealth to the point where you won't get a dime in the divorce. Quitting his job was a genius move. When he arrives in court broke and unemployed, you too can. We just need to agree on a way to part ways without any financial obligations. I doubt he'll even show up. I said I think he's skipped town. I left him before he left me. I have no clue where he went. My lawyer asked how I'm going to serve him with divorce papers if I don't know where he is. Can I get a divorce without all this hassle? I asked what about abandonment? It takes 3 years in this state. Do you have enough funds to last that long? He asked. Remember, I just mentioned he drained all. I had to cancel my credit cards, so I couldn't pay your fees. When I called, I just heard beeps, and I could hear the movers snickering. That's how my life fell apart. I stayed with my mom for a while. Mark was thorough. He sold or gave away all our stuff. He took all 3 cars, both his Mustangs and the winter Jeep. He kept my Lexus, but I couldn't pay the payments, so it was repossessed. I talked to several lawyers who worked for free, and they all agreed I needed to stir up some serious trouble to counter his actions. Almost every lawyer upon hearing the facts deemed his actions brilliant and entirely lawful. There's no law saying a man must remain with his wife just because they're married, nor is there any prohibition against selling a jointly owned home. Mark had full entitlement to withdraw funds from our accounts since he was the primary account holder. He came out on top. I tried reaching him, but his number was disconnected. And there was a message on the answering machine. I was sure he'd left me some kind of clue, but I just couldn't make head or tail of it. Days turned into weeks, and then months passed with no word from him. I lost CJ within the first month. He was struggling to make rent after his girlfriend left him for another guy on the same day Mark abandoned me. What were the odds? One day, while listening to the radio, I broke down in tears. There was a band I vaguely knew of called the Eagles. Their lead singer was Glenn. Fry sang a song called Already Gone, which mirrored my life so closely that I got a bit emotional. The gibberish Mark uttered or wrote to me on that day of his preemptive strike was lifted straight from the song. My life was filled with hard labor. I toiled 6 days a week alongside my mother cleaning hotel rooms. Many guests reminded me of my past life. I habitually took my blessings for granted, always believing I deserved more. After just a few days of struggling to survive, I started to regret how I treated my husband. It pained me to recall that I used to spend more on makeup in 2 weeks than I earned in my current salary at 43. I knew my opportunities were limited. The only odd thing was that after 3 years of hardship and poor diet, I gained a few pounds and stopped coloring my hair. One day, I got home and found an invitation waiting for me the next day. It was for a local cafe, but there was no name on it. I knew it was from Mark. Suddenly, it clicked. Mark could have emptied our accounts, but he left an odd sum of $311. It's been 3 years, 1 month and 1 week since he left me. I wish I had realized this sooner. I could have dieted and reclaimed my figure. Then I realized it didn't matter. Mark always loved me. Blonde hair and an ample chest were my choice. While I strove to look my best, a realization struck. I suddenly remembered the song's final line, which Mark quoted before he departed. It's so common that we live in chains without even knowing we have the key. There was a message in the invitation, which meant we'd come full circle. I was sure this meant he was ready to bring me back into his life. It suddenly dawned on me that I'd been a fool. I was always in control while Mark worked hard to make my wishes come true. The only time he refused was when I tried to force him into something he didn't want to do when I tried to divorce him. He left, taking it personally. As expected, he granted my request and left. Interestingly, I had spent the last 3 years anticipating the inevitable and expecting divorce papers to arrive at some point. However, they never did. Now I understood why Mark still loved me and was excited for our reunion. I arrived at the bar slightly early. A disheveled bartender with signs of heavy drinking approached my table and said, "You've put on weight. How many drinks? Have you eaten? Have you had enough to drink to forget your own shortcomings? What brings you here, CJ? I thought you still worked here." He replied, "I received an invitation for lunch at a cafe across the street." I explained, "I came to gather courage." He observed, "What's going on?" I inquired, "Did yours include a cryptic riddle?" He replied, "No, it wasn't much of a mystery." I replied, "It was Mark's way of signaling that he wants me back." "What do you think?" He asked me to repeat it. I read it back to him, "We've come full circle. I'm ready to give you what you want." I told him, "You're right. His differs from mine. Mine posed a question, why does a squirrel hide nuts in its nest? I admitted I believe it means Shannon wants me back. He concluded, squirrels hide nuts to protect them from birds. Birds is slang for women. Shannon's telling me she doesn't want me with other women. I think they colluded to reunite us after. I was angry. I wanted to forget all this. I'd learned a lot over the past 3 years, but I was ready to abandon it all if Mark wanted me back. He'd have to work hard for it. I stormed out of the bar and made my way across the street to the cafe. I took a seat at a small table and scanned the cafe. CJ was entering the cafe. He sat at a nearby table on the sidewalk where 2 college guys played hacky sack. I pondered his riddle. I suddenly realized his mistake. Even though he was waving desperately, he was still engrossed with the guys until he eventually noticed me. His wave and headshake left me puzzled as CJ sat. The guys nearby lost control of their bag, which flew towards him and toppled his glass. CJ was angry as another bag fell before him. One of the guys tried to kick the bag back up but missed, fortunately leaving it undamaged, but his foot landed a mighty blow to CJ's. I rushed over when I heard him scream. The waiters tried to help him up, but all they could do was support him as the ambulance arrived to take him away. I told him your interpretation was wrong through his pain. He groaned, she didn't want you to come back. I explained, it's not about birds. It's about reproductive organs. He grumbled and tried to speak further, but the waiters interrupted by showing up a girl who looked like a college student, tall and fair. She had the same hair color as me when I was younger. She came over with a briefcase and a piece of gum in her mouth. Are you Anna Clayton? She asked. Yes, I replied, handing her a stack of papers. She explained his list of demands. Why don't you ask him yourself? You've been served, she spat, glancing around the cafe. I suddenly spotted him. The riddle's meaning dawned on me. Full circle meant achieving what I desired, not necessarily Mark's return. This meant that I got what I wanted after Mark and I split up and got divorced. The thing is, it wasn't what I wanted anymore. I missed the life I used to have and lost. To be honest, I was used to living modestly. Most importantly, I wanted to reconnect with Mark. Then I saw him. He looked well, even better than when we parted ways. He seemed happy, but he wasn't alone. He was with a woman. She had red hair, was young, stunningly beautiful, and noticeably pregnant. Between them, they had a little girl who blended perfectly. She had Mark's hair color and her mother's bright green eyes. This small girl gave me the same strange smile Mark had. Maybe it was genetic, or maybe she sensed what was going on and what it meant. I realized as soon as I saw them together that it was really over. There was no way of getting Mark back, emotionally. He was distant and didn't want to be with me. This redhead had already taken him in and loved him. I also noticed that she was physically present and had borne him children. When I reviewed the divorce papers, I saw that Mark was retaliating against me. I wanted to secure financial compensation through legal means. I needed his money, but not him. In the end, I got neither. He divorced me, claiming abandonment, which allowed him to retain all his assets and his newfound happiness. I glanced up from the paperwork for one final glimpse of the man I'd lost, but it was too late. He had already departed, leaving me with nothing but tears.